The bureau sent 4 of them, which I always thought was 1 more than necessary and 3 more than wise. I was out behind the south side drying barn when the transport set down in the paddock. Fetch heard it before I did. His ears came up, both of them, sharp, the way they did when something he hadn't categorized yet arrived in his territory. He didn't make a sound. He just stood up from the dust where he'd been lying and faced the paddock gate, and I knew to put down my tools. Fetch is a rhodesian ridgeback. He is 11 years old, which means the ridge of fur along his spine has gone gray at the roots, and the skin around his muzzle has gone loose and kind, and he has a scar across his left shoulder from a piece of farm equipment I am not proud of. He weighs 54 kilograms. He moves at a pace that reads as slow right up until it isn't. The Voluntarily Compact's Collector Bureau did not have a category for him. I know this because later, when I read the incident file, the field where species should have been listed read, Companion Unit NON Combat Classed, Earth Origin. Which is technically accurate. Which is part of the problem. The 4 collectors came through the paddock gate information, which told me they'd trained for something but not for this. They were Voluntarily standard, broad-chested, scaled along the neck and jaw, the kind of species that reads as large until you've spent enough time outdoors to recalibrate. The lead one carried a writ tablet and wore a sash that indicated senior bureau rank. The other 3 carried themselves like furniture arranged for emphasis. I met them at the edge of the equipment lane. Fetch walked beside me at heel without being told, which he has done since he was 18 months old and which the collectors did not read correctly. The lead collector, Overseer Dravath, his sash said, looked at Fetch the way that species sometimes looks at Earth animals. Not fear. Not recognition. The mild contempt of someone looking at something that hasn't been processed yet. Merrick Ostro, Dravath said. Agricultural Lease Parcel 14C, Cess's Margin Holding Registry. You are 3 cycles in arrears on the Compact's land improvement levy. I'm aware of the arrearage, I said. I've filed a dispute. The levy was applied to land I don't hold. The Western Tract reverted to the Compact 18 months ago when Hendricks quit. The dispute is pending review. He said it the way bureaus say things that mean the dispute will be pending review until I'm dead. Until resolution, the levy stands. We are here to assess attachable assets. I had been farming leased land for 22 years. On 4 continents, 2 moons, and 1 station ring that shook every time a freighter docked. I have dealt with bureaus before. I know what pending review means, and I know what attachable assets means, and I know what 4 collectors information means. You're welcome to the manifest, I said. Come up to the office. We walked up the equipment lane toward the main building. Fetch stayed at my left, 1 pace back, which is where he has walked for 11 years. Dravath walked on my right. One of the 3 trailing collectors, the youngest-looking one, slate gray scales, restless, moved up alongside Fetch and looked down at him the way young collectors in formation sometimes look at things, assessing, dismissive, not quite careful enough. Fetch glanced up at him once. Then looked forward again. The young collector apparently took this as permission, because he reached out and put a hand on the back of Fetch's neck in the particular way that is not a greeting and is not affection and is the thing you do when you want something to understand its place. Fetch stopped walking. I stopped walking. The young collector realized, in the next half second, that he had made an error in classification. Fetch did not growl. He did not show his teeth. He turned his head and looked at the collector's hand in the way that certain things look at certain other things when a decision has already been made and is in the process of being executed. The young collector removed his hand. He took 2 steps back. He did not speak. The other 2 trailing collectors had gone very still. Dravath looked back, looked at the young collector's expression, and looked at Fetch. Fetch had already looked away. He was watching me, waiting to continue. He's friendly, I said. When the situation calls for it. Dravath made a sound that might have been a response and might have been him deciding not to make one. He looked at the ridge of fur along Fetch's spine, it had gone flat again, easy, just an old dog walking beside a farmer. He looked at it for a moment longer than he needed to. Then he faced forward. We continued up the lane. In the office, Dravath reviewed the manifest. I gave him the hard copies he asked for. The two collectors in the back of the room were doing the thing that sometimes happens once an animal has made a decision visible. They were standing precisely where they had been standing when the decision happened and moving very carefully about changing anything. The young collector had taken a position near the door. He was watching Fetch. Fetch was lying on the mat beside my desk with his chin on his forepaws, breathing slowly, watching nothing in particular. The crawler units are attachable, Dravath said. The grain processors are co-registered, we'll need to file for secondary claim. That'll take another review cycle, I said. Yes. He was already entering it. He didn't look up. The Bureau is within its rights to begin preliminary holding of liquid operating assets pending. He stopped. One of the two trailing collectors had made a sound. Not a word. More the sound a large chest makes when something unexpected occurs to it at close range. I looked back. Fetch was standing. He hadn't barked. He hadn't lunged. He had simply stood up from the mat, and the collector nearest the inner wall had apparently tried to move something on the rack beside my filing shelves, a laminated copy of the original lease, probably checking the Western Tract notation. And Fetch was standing between him and the rack with his head low and his weight forward and his ridge up, which is the only time you ever see the ridge. The collector was not moving. Leave it, I said. Fetch looked at me. The ridge went down. He turned and walked back to the mat and lay down. The collector took a breath that sounded like a man learning a new fact about himself. I think, Dravath said, after a moment, we have enough for the preliminary report. I imagine so, I said. They filed out. The young collector went first. The two in the back went together, which I understood. Dravath paused in the doorway and looked at Fetch on the mat, then looked at me, then looked at whatever calculation he was making behind his eyes. The dispute on the Western Tract, he said. I'll flag it for expedited review. I'd appreciate that, I said. He left. The transport was off the paddock inside 10 minutes. Fetch walked to the paddock gate and watched it go, then came back and lay down in the dust in the sun, in the spot he'd been in before, and put his nose on his forepaws and closed his eyes. I filed the incident log that afternoon. Under narrative I wrote, * Collector Bureau representatives conducted asset review, manifest provided, no attachable items removed. Matter concluded without escalation, * under outcome I wrote, voluntarily resolved. The Compact's regional office sent a response 7 days later. The Western Tract levy dispute had been reviewed and found in my favor. The arrearage was voided. A note at the bottom, and signed, said that future levy assessments on Parcel 14C would be subject to additional administrative verification before dispatch of collection representatives. I read that line twice. Then I went outside, where Fetch was lying in the dust by the south barn in the afternoon sun, the way he does when the day is ordinary and the work is done and nobody is coming. I sat down on the equipment step and he moved, the way he always does, until his head was on my knee. The gray on his muzzle caught the light. His breathing was slow and even and entirely unbothered. The moon's sun was going flat and orange across the paddock. The grain processors ran quiet behind the barn. Everything was the way it had been before, which was the only outcome I had ever been interested in. Fetch sighed once, deeply, and went to sleep. I left the incident file open on the tablet long enough to read the final line one more time. Voluntarily resolved, then I closed it, and went inside, and that was the end of the matter, as far as anyone official was ever going to say.